Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Integrity Matters by Turnitin. With me in the house today is Lis Conde. Liz, can you introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your educational background and your current work as a researcher.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for the invitation. My name is Lis. I'm originally from Guatemala, and currently I'm working as a lead learning designer for Keypath Education in Australia. I am also a researcher. I did my PhD in something called pedagogical beliefs. And that sounds really abstract, but it has a lot to do with how teachers specifically think about the way they're designing their courses and how they actually go about integrating technology into their learning designs. And it's a really interesting area. A lot of universities, put a lot of money into professional development for their academics, and so do schools. But what I found out in my research is that what you believe actually influences what you do in the classroom. And the problem is that not a lot of people are aware of what they believe or not aware of how they actually teach. And a phenomenon that I was able to observe is the fact that, you get a lot of subject matter experts. More than 50% of university teaching in Australia is actually done by sessional staff. These are people who are highly qualified in their subject matter. They get hired because of their qualifications, but often their pedagogical preparation is not really a focus for their employment. So they get thrown out into the world and then they go teaching, and often they do not know how to do that. So what they end up doing is they go back and they retrieve to how they were taught themselves. So, for example, if you have a person who grew up in the 70s, in the 60s, and the 80s, where it was a highly behaviorist approach, what you end up having is a person who will likely have a very teacher-centered approach, would come into the classroom, would lecture at students for around an hour or so, then would have a summative assessment at the end where students are supposed to remember everything, answer questions, and get their grade. And that's a lot of how education looks like right now. The thing is that, when you have somebody like that and it's not aware that they have a teacher-centered approach, what ends up happening is that, you have a wonderful, graduate certificate of university teaching, for example, where a lot of the focus is on educational technology and you teach them how to do webinars and all these wonderful things. And what happens is that the strategies that you're presenting are not aligning with their beliefs. So in my research, I've found ways to create professional development in a way that makes the teacher aware of how they teach so that they get the motivation to change. And so later on, you can intervene and actually teach them how to use technology. So in a long story, that's my focus.
Perfect. Now, you've also mentioned the behaviorist approach to teaching and summative assessment. So I think it's a good segue to my next question, which is, how do you explain authentic assessment and how do you support a shift in the culture when it comes to assessment design, especially in these times of a pandemic?
What a question, Chooks. Yes. So if you want to be theoretical, you can talk about the work of Dan Harrington and Ron Oliver and definitely describe authentic assessments as, tasks that simulate an authentic context, and that, aim at higher order skills. But what does that mean, really? How is that done in practice? And in my learning design practice, I actually stay away from the concept of authentic assessment. And what I do is that I present it as what is a case, what is a problem, what is a project, what's the type of collaboration, what's the type of demonstration that you would do in the industry, and how can we translate that into a task that students can do in a simpler way, just a simplified task from that. When you actually get, going to what I was telling you about, the demographics of academics here and in higher education, there's a lot of people who are hired and they don't have that pedagogical preparation. So what that means is that you talk about, oh yeah, let's do active learning approaches. It's a word, or the flipped classroom, or authentic assessments are words that are buzzing words that are everywhere. But people don't really know what they mean. So I would recommend that first, stay away from the concept, make it more practical by relating it to what they actually do in practice. And, that's becoming really relevant in a pandemic. I recently, like a couple months ago, I had a call from one of our university partners. The associate dean of teaching and learning gave me a call, and he was dealing with passive-aggressive revolt from all of the academics. He actually leads the School of Sciences, and what he was telling me is that, especially in maths and statistics, what they found in this pandemic is that students went away, they were studying from home, and what ended up happening is that academic integrity became a huge issue. You have a summative assessment and students are just clicking and answering multiple choice questions. How do you prevent them from cheating? And so what his trickle down policy is you need to move away from summative assessments into formative assessments that actually deal with authentic context. And the revolt was that half of his academics didn't know how to do it, and they were nervous about it. You have a lot of university teachers who are experts and who are sort of nervous about accepting the fact that, well, I don't know what you're talking about, really. I teach how I was taught, which means that I actually do an assessment at the end. So what's this deal with authentic assessments? So what I ended up recommending was a community of practice approach, which is kind of like a professional development approach. If you come and you tell a teacher that doesn't understand what authentic assessment is to do an authentic assessment, then they probably will not do it. But if you actually sit that teacher around with their peers in like an hour or 2 hour session, and you start asking, well, would you actually do in the industry? And what are some of the opportunities that we have to turn those actions into cases, into problems, into projects? And how about in groups, we actually design them for our own curriculum, and then we share them with each other. And then you have a follow-up session, like maybe 2 months after, with where your academic comes back and you evaluate how that is going, So I guess how you can actually do that cultural change is stay away from using the word authentic assessments and make it more of a palpable concept for the academic. And two, actually create a community for the academic when they can actually share their experiences and they can actually co-design their own tasks together. And as a part of that, there's a form of evaluation involved where, they're talking to their peers and they're saying, well, is this working or not? And how can we improve, And slowly you start seeing this cultural change.
Great. That's a really good response. And I think it's one of the best aspects of learning, that learning from your peers, and that actually fosters the collaboration and the change in the culture. My next question is around constructive alignment. I'm going to stay away from the word authentic assessment. So my question will be around how does constructive alignment enable or support the design of assessments?
Yeah, that's a great question. So let's think that's another word, constructive alignment, that just sort of goes out and everybody needs to ensure it without really knowing what it is. And initially, the concept was introduced by this guy called Biggs. His last name was Biggs in 1996, and he talked about how a learning experience is a sequence that includes resources, tasks, the context, your students, your teacher, and everything is aligned to an objective, right? So it actually takes constructive alignment. It's about taking into consideration the entirety of who and what will be involved in a learning experience and aligning that to a specific objective. So what constructive alignment does, and in the world of AQF9, for example, let's just, talk about universities for a bit. Constructive alignment it's really difficult if you don't know what it is, but it's really simple if you know what it is. And, with FQF9, for example, is you already have, your higher order level skills that are really kind of set up. You get your synthesize, your evaluate, your apply, and all of these different skills that you can easily align to your projects, your cases, your problems, your collaboration, your cooperation, your demonstrations. Just to give you an example, I had a really good unit developed a couple of years ago, and I really enjoyed it. The objective was something around explore, evaluate, and apply ethical hacking principles and skills. Right? It was a really broad objective. So this is where I sat down with the academic and I was like, well, what does this mean? What does an ethical hacker do in their daily practice? What have you done as an ethical hacker in the industry? It's like, oh, yeah, that's a really good question. Oh, look, one of the things that we had to do with this was this idea of a pen testing scenario. I was like, great. That's it. That's the objective. That's the task. Now, it's a huge task. You need to evaluate. You need to explore. You need to see exemplars. And so one objective ended up being activities where students were seeing exemplars, evaluating, deconstructing, contrasting, and comparing exemplars of pen testing scenarios, seeing networks where they're actually trying to identify where the danger or the threat is. And then as a result, the task was now look at this picture and this network and create a pen testing scenario. So everything was aligned, not only the tasks, the resources, the context, and the idea was aligned to this one sentence, explore, evaluate, and apply ethical hacking principles and skills. So that was a whole, and it ended up being a really successful unit because students were really engaged and it was a real challenge for them,
Okay. I do want to applaud and appreciate the fact that you're sharing these core examples that actually makes it or brings the concepts to life. I think my next question, I think you've already alluded to this as a response, is now the need for just-in-time feedback when it comes to assessment design, and especially now that we're in a very remote setting where everyone's doing things remotely. What assessment types should academics be looking to design for, taking into consideration the need for just-in-time feedback?
So going back to your AQF, and once you start seeing the broad picture, it's really easy to align, active learning strategies, or again, your cases, your projects, your problems, your demonstrations, to just-in-time feedback. But let's just explore what just-in-time teaching is, because a lot of people, when you say just-in-time feedback, it's like, oh my God, as a facilitator, I'm going to have to see all these responses, and I'm going to have to, provide feedback to everybody. And yet, no. it doesn't have to be that complicated. You can create a setup that facilitates your visualization of what exactly is going on in the classroom. So just-in-time teaching is you coming up with a very abstract problem, concept, or question and creating a survey through Microsoft Forms, for example, Google Forms, or a clicker system such as Poll Everywhere, sending it out to the students before they come to class or they come to their virtual classroom or webinar. And then the students will have to think about and answer that poll or survey before they come to your classroom. Now, it doesn't mean that you as a facilitator will actually need to see everything or respond to every single student. What you will do if you set up correctly is you will go to a page, you will see a visualization, and you will understand, oh yes, this is where my students are having problems, or this is actually the wrong answer, and this is the type of feedback I need to provide. And the benefit from a cognitive perspective, the benefit is this hyper there's a principle where you actually need to cognitive principle. You actually come in and where a student is really, really certain of their answer, they come and answer the poll or the survey, and they're like, yeah, I know this answer, and then they come back to you and their answer is wrong. It's interesting that when you prove somebody wrong, they tend to remember and it sticks with you better. And so the benefit of something like just-in-time teaching is that you are giving proper feedback, immediate feedback that can actually achieve that goal, of getting students to really remember.
Okay.
So, yeah.
I actually really agree. I think one of my biggest learning situations have always been when I've been told I was wrong, or when there's pain attached to the feedback. I never forget that experience, and I'm always very eager to remember the right answer. So I think that's a really good thing to share there as well.
Thanks for listening. This concludes part 1 of our conversation. Please join us again for part 2.